I grew up in a house where my father fixed everything himself, where strange sounds always had explanations, where a creak in the floor was just the wood settling and a shadow in the hallway was just the way the light fell at a certain angle. I was raised to look for the rational answer first and to trust it. So when I tell you what happened in the house I bought in Tulsa, Oklahoma, I need you to understand that I spent months trying to find the rational answer. I tried harder than most people would have. I called professionals. I hired contractors. I had 2 separate inspectors walk through that house looking for something, anything, that could explain what I was experiencing. None of them found it. What they found instead was a house that looked completely normal, completely undisturbed, completely empty. And that was exactly the problem. Because the house was not empty. I know that now. I knew it before any of them arrived, if I am being honest with myself. I just was not ready to admit it yet. I bought the house in the spring of 2021. It was a 1940s property on a quiet street in a suburb outside the city, the kind of neighborhood where the houses are all slightly different from each other but share the same bones, the same era, the same particular kind of stillness that older residential streets have at night. I paid less than market value because the house needed work, which suited me fine. I was 28, I had some savings, I had watched enough renovation videos online to feel dangerously confident about my ability to handle whatever the inspection flagged. The inspection flagged the usual things. Old wiring that needed updating eventually. A roof that had maybe 5 good years left in it. A crawl space that held some moisture and would need monitoring. Nothing alarming. Nothing that made me hesitate. I moved in on a Thursday in late April and spent the first 2 weekends painting walls and replacing cabinet hardware and feeling very pleased with myself. The house felt good. It felt like mine. I would come home from work and walk through the rooms and think about what I was going to fix next and feel genuinely happy in a way I had not felt in a long time. That feeling lasted about 3 months. The scratching started in July. I remember the exact night because I had just gotten off a late shift and it was close to midnight and I was in bed with the lights off when I first heard it. It came from the wall directly behind my headboard. A slow, deliberate scratching sound, like something dragging itself along the inside of the drywall. My first thought was raccoons. Old houses in Oklahoma get them regularly, especially in summer when they are looking for cool places to nest. I made a mental note to call an exterminator in the morning and rolled over and eventually fell asleep. The exterminator came 3 days later. He was thorough. He checked the attic, the crawl space, the eaves, the gaps around the utility pipes where animals commonly enter. He spent almost 2 hours in and around that house. When he came back inside he told me he had not found a single sign of animal activity. No droppings, no nesting material, no chewed wood or insulation, no entry points. He said whatever I was hearing, it was not coming from an animal living in the structure. He said it in a matter-of-fact way, the way tradespeople do when they have ruled something out and consider their job complete. I thanked him, paid him, and stood in my kitchen after he left trying to figure out what that meant. The scratching came back that night. Same wall. Same slow, dragging quality, like something with long nails pulling itself from one side of the cavity to the other. I lay there in the dark and listened to it for almost 20 minutes before it stopped. I told myself it was the pipes. I told myself it was the house contracting as the temperature dropped overnight. I told myself every reasonable thing I could think of, and none of it made the sound feel reasonable. By the end of that week I had heard it 4 more times. Always at night. Always from the same wall behind my headboard. Always that same unhurried, deliberate quality that made it feel less like an animal moving and more like something moving with intention. Something that knew exactly where it was going. The second week was when the sound changed. I had gotten used to the scratching in the way you get used to something you cannot explain and cannot stop. I had started sleeping with a white noise machine running on my nightstand, which helped during the early part of the night. But around 2 or 3 in the morning the white noise was not enough. Because by the second week it was not scratching anymore. It was knocking. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, coming from directly inside the wall behind my head. Not a pipe ticking as it cooled. Not a branch hitting the exterior. 3 deliberate knocks, the kind you make on a door when you want someone on the other side to know you are there. I sat up the first night I heard it with my heart going so fast I could feel it in my throat. I waited. 3 more knocks. A pause. 3 more. I turned on every light in the bedroom and sat there until sunrise and did not hear it again. The next morning I called a plumber. Then I called the original home inspector. I needed someone to tell me there was a pipe running through. I need you to understand what it means for a sound to follow you across a room. I had moved my bed to the opposite wall specifically because I wanted to test whether the knocking was tied to a fixed point in the structure, a pipe or a beam or something mechanical that only affected one part of the wall. If the sound stayed on the original wall, that would be evidence of something physical, something with a location I could point to and investigate. If it followed me, that meant something else entirely, and I was not ready to think about what that something else might be. It followed me. I lay on the opposite side of the room that first night with my eyes open in the dark, and I heard the same 3 knocks coming from the new wall, the wall I had moved toward, at 2:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone the moment I heard it. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 more. Then silence. I did not sleep for the rest of that night. I want to tell you that I immediately called someone, that I had the good sense to recognize that something was genuinely wrong and to reach out for help. But the truth is that I spent the next several weeks doing what most people do when they encounter something they cannot explain, which is to keep trying to explain it. I had an electrician come and check the wiring in the walls around my bedroom. I read about infrasound, about how certain low-frequency vibrations can cause feelings of unease and even auditory hallucinations in some people. I read about how old houses sometimes have structural resonance issues that can create rhythmic sounds in certain weather conditions. I tried every explanation I could find online and tested each one methodically, and none of them held up when I compared them to what I was actually experiencing every 2 or 3 nights like clockwork. The knocking was real. I knew it was real. I just did not know what was making it. The electrician was the one who mentioned the previous owner. He had done work in the house before, several years earlier, and he mentioned almost as an aside while he was packing up his tools that the woman who had lived there before me had been something of a recluse in her final years. She had lived alone in the house for almost 4 decades. Her neighbors had rarely seen her. In the last year or 2 before she passed, People on the street had sometimes heard her talking inside the house even though she lived by herself. Not on the phone. Just talking. The electrician said it with a slight smile like it was a funny piece of neighborhood gossip. He left and I stood in my kitchen thinking about a woman who had lived alone in my house for 40 years and talked to someone no one else could see. I thought about what kind of company she might have kept. I tried not to think about whether that company was still here. The moving object started about 5 months after I moved in. I want to be precise about this because I know how it sounds. I am not talking about dramatic, obvious displacement, furniture rearranged or pictures knocked off walls. I am talking about small things, small enough that I second-guessed myself each time it happened. A coffee mug that I was certain I had left on the kitchen counter would be on the kitchen table the next morning. A book I kept on my nightstand would be on the floor, open, face down, the pages slightly fanned, like someone had put it down in the middle of reading it. My keys, which I always placed on the hook by the front door without exception because I had locked myself out twice in my first apartment and learned my lesson, would be on the kitchen counter or the bathroom shelf or once on the floor directly in front of the bathroom mirror, sitting in a neat little pile like they had been deliberately placed. The first few times I told myself I was tired. I worked long hours and kept an irregular schedule, and it was entirely possible I was leaving things in places I did not remember. I am a scientist by training, or close enough to one, and I believe in accounting for human error before moving on to more dramatic explanations. So I started being extremely deliberate. I would set an object down and say out loud where I was putting it, the way you do when you are trying to build a memory. Mug on the counter,